All right, so we're going live now. It is the evening of April 9th, 2020. I almost said 2019 to think it's a whole new year. Oh my goodness. Well, we're going to be going live in just a few minutes with one of the preeminent and forefront futurists in the industry, Nikolas Badminton. We'll get started in just a few minutes for anyone who's joining us live. Nikolas, where are you in the world today?
I'm up in Canada, the Great White North. It's a sunny day. I'm in the basement doing work, and I'm in Toronto. I used to live in Vancouver on the West Coast, and now I live on the East Coast. And yeah, it's a great place to be in. It's a little bit more serious up here, and we've had some pretty serious conversations today with the government about what's going to happen. And I think that everyone I know is kind of locked down, staying at home and trying to stay safe.
Now, I know in the United States, I'm in New York City, and we're in this like quarantine and social distancing. And I was talking earlier with a thought leader in the United Kingdom, and they said there it's often called like containment. So there's a different phrase. What do you guys call
Sure.
it in Canada?
I think it's just lockdown, staying at home, hashtag stay the F at home, that's it. We don't call it anything particularly special. We call it particularly irritating. It's disrupting our lives and meaning that we can't get together with friends. So that's a real challenge, but that's a real challenge for everyone around the world.
Yeah. Have you at all in the last few weeks done any like Zoom parties, house parties, or any of these little remote house party? I mean by like the remote house party app, or any of those to engage with your friends?
Yeah, I've just kept it on Zoom and sometimes on FaceTime. I've been doing a lot of television and radio. Radio is nice and easy. Television, they've got all sorts of industry apps that I've been logging into that make sure that I look a lot better than Skype represents me or Zoom represents me on television, right? But no, I was supposed to be in the UK 3 weeks ago for some work and seeing my parents, and also going out with some friends I hadn't seen for about 18 months. So instead of going out in London in some of the great pub culture out there, we sort of all sat in our respective homes. They were both in the UK. I was sat here. Just really interesting sharing stories. I mean, the UK is a really tough situation right now. A massive impact over there. It's very close quarters. If you're working in and around London, it's just so tough. You're down in New York City, it's the same situation.
Yeah, I mean, one of the good things that we've seen, fortunately, with the UK is Boris Johnson was released from his intensive care in the hospital. So thankfully, hopefully the situation will improve there soon. And I think we're going to talk a lot about what is going on in the world today with this pandemic. So for all our
Sure.
listeners who are joining us, we're about to go live. Listeners, welcome back to the HumAIn podcast. Today, our guest is Nikolas Badminton. Nikolas is a futurist. He's a speaker, a consultant, and an advisor to trillion-dollar companies and governments, where he advises on where we're heading in the future, especially around artificial intelligence, looking at the next 5 to 25 years down the road. And especially where we are today in this pandemic with AI, with a lot of things going on, I think his advice is more timely than ever before. So, Nikolas, thanks for joining us on HumAIn.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I don't know whether it's really solid advice. It's more speculation about where we could end up like heading towards.
I think although we don't know yet, and there's all these words going around, such as black swans and black elephants, which we'll dive deeper into the show, I
Yeah.
think it's great first to share with our audience a little bit about your background of getting into AI and how you've become this thought leader who's doing fantastic work in the space.
Yeah, so about the age of 10 years old, I started programming computers, and I sort of flunked out of school and was one of those kids sat in his bedroom hacking away and hacking computer games and writing other games and applications. And I eventually made my way to university a little later than some because I sort of bucked the trend and didn't really graduate from school in the same way as most people. And I eventually ended up in a program called Applied Psychology and Computing at Bournemouth University. I got a Bachelor of Science in that degree. And what I did was I focused on some of the more challenging subjects in there. and I looked at organizational design. I looked at the psychology behind that. But I also went into linguistics and artificial intelligence, and using artificial intelligence to do grammatical grammar checking and grammatical investigations. It was pretty interesting. It was early days. It didn't work very well. Single layer neural networks. And then I sort of dropped into the data world, massive data infrastructures, using analytics, behavioral targeting of customers using data, way before all of the Cambridge Analytica situation. And it was a lot slower, and it was a lot more basic, but is incredibly successful from a profitability perspective for my clients. So I spent about 16, 17 years in that, moved to Canada, went to work in advertising, and then ended up sort of running my own events, talking about humanity and technology, doing some events with Amber Case, Cyborg Camp, and running unconferences called Future Camp, and doing podcasts. And then suddenly I was writing a lot for people like the Huffington Post, and then a little bit for Forbes, and then a little bit for TechCrunch. And people started calling me a futurist, which I thought was strange. But then it started to make a lot of sense. And then I started to be hired to speak about artificial intelligence about 6-7 years ago. And it was really just a nascent sort of occupation there. And it just really started to catch on fire. So we really got into talking about, the human ethics and the hybridity of human and the machine very early on, whereas a lot of people were suddenly making huge claims about automation replacing hundreds of millions of people around the world, and robotics and robotic process automation. A lot of unqualified people talking about speculations of future worlds that were not really going to happen. So I grounded ourselves in talking about humanity, and that's what I do. I talk about our futures, and it's speculation at best, but really it's a lot of fun thinking about the signals that we see today and speculating how that's going to have a ripple effect 5, 10, 20 years into the future.
So I love that you just mentioned about the practical side of humans and machines. We're seeing, as we're being socially distanced in our homes, a lot of new television shows coming out on Netflix, HBO, and Amazon Prime, like Westworld and Devs and The Loop. And it makes you wonder, could the world be like this, or is it something that we shouldn't be worrying about just yet? So I know it's very futurist, but are we moving to a James Delos Westworld? Are we moving to a Dev's world with a supercomputer? What's your take on some of these TV shows?
Yeah, I remember the first Westworld with Yul Brynner, and it was pretty fantastical at that point in time. But like, really, if you look at that, there's a lot of moving parts there. Like literally, sentient AI, independent thinking, AGI, and really, something that can act as a human, move as a human, perceive, create its own philosophy, create its own purpose. And we are a long way from that. I sort of question people that are trying to give that to machines, because it's very difficult, because we can't work out what it truly means for ourselves beyond sort of a metaphysical and sort of discussionary philosophical bent. And I spent a lot of time at university looking at complexity theory, chaos theory, thinking about consciousness, and we're not really that much more ahead than we were 25 years ago. So it's interesting as a debate around ethics and artificial intelligence around a fantastical future. In a couple of 100 years, might we have someone that we can see in Westworld today at that point in time? Yeah, maybe, but that's going to be a really very complex engineered organism. Will it be biological? We don't really know. Will we be able to create artificial intelligence and program it like Ex Machina or these sort of biological ideas around artificial intelligence? I'm not quite sure. A couple of 100 years, maybe, but certainly not in the next 5, 10, 25, even 30 years.
And, if we segue away from like Westworld and some of these, futuristic or very futuristic ideas, I know you've had the opportunity to be involved with some docu-series, and one of them in the last couple of years, The Age of AI, where you give some more practical looking as you shaped these conversations. Can you tell us more about that docu-series and what that looked like?
Yeah, so I was living in Vancouver. It was a couple of summers ago, and I was approached by a producer that worked for a company called Network Entertainment, and they were working with Team Downey, which was Robert Downey Jr.'s production company, and YouTube on this 8-part series on artificial intelligence. And we had a coffee, me and the producer, and after an hour, she said, "Okay, we need to get you in the room with the script writers because I think that we might be, going into directions that maybe not." As pure as they should be when we're actually thinking about artificial intelligence. Anyway, I spent a few days locked in a room with script writers, looking at their ideas, really trying to understand what they're trying to achieve. And what was really heartening was they wanted to tell human stories. So I sort of talked to them about dialing that up and saying, this is about humans. This is ultimately about a hybridity between humans and technology. It doesn't live on its own. There's not robotics that are independent from who we are that are suddenly trying to take over the world. There's actual practical applications that are going to help us solve big problems. So that idea around humanity solving big problems using artificial intelligence and really delving into some big ideas about what it could be is where we started. And we went through 8 different ideas and areas, and I helped the script writers really structure what this should look like. And over time, I stepped away, and over time they developed it. But I'm pretty glad that they sort of stuck on the themes of humanity progressing forward because of this technology, and not that technology progressing beyond who we are.
And I love how you mentioned you've had these 8 different episodes that, as you've been shaping, it's about humans and machines together. And in the world that we're living today, with this pandemic, with COVID-19 and coronavirus, I think a lot of it is how can we get practical? We were looking earlier in one of our episodes about the Google Trends, and we saw that during the whole pandemic, AI went down in the trends, and now it's back up a peak. People are bored. People want to get back into technology. They want to work. They want to make a difference. And so I think AI could be a very useful theme here. What are some of the things you're seeing around AI in the age of this pandemic?
Yeah, so it was actually interesting that a company up here in Toronto called Blue Dot actually noticed on December the 30th last year that there was a strange cluster of new kind of pneumonias that were happening around a market in Wuhan. It was the first company to really start waving the red flags. Not that it really did us any good, because China didn't really act on this very quickly. They could have locked it down, right? These things are slightly unpredictable, and the tracing and the uncontrollable spread wasn't quite understood there. So I understand things. So there's no pointing fingers from here. But Blue Dot really stepped forward, and now there's a bunch of other artificial intelligence companies that are stepping up to process that data, to help people look for discoveries for drugs to treat it, to look for new ways of considering proteins and how they're structured in relation to the virus, and how we could maybe even create vaccines. I find that to be incredibly useful, and that practical application is something that's very important here. Now, what's really important, coming back to Blue Dot, is that they're a company that uses artificial intelligence, but it's not independent of actual expertise. They do actually have humans and the machine working together. So they've got about 40 people that are veterinarians, doctors, epidemiologists, engineers, data scientists, software developers, all working together, because artificial intelligence just doesn't wander off and become useful. It needs a lot of training. It needs a lot of guidance. It needs a lot of that practical expertise. And sure, it might be able to start identifying patterns that we may not see as readily or as easy as AI. But our practical wisdom needs to be injected into the overall solution.
So thinking about these solutions, I mean, it's incredible to see that companies here in 2020 can figure out when something's going to happen before it happens. It reminds me of one of my all-time favorite movies, The Minority Report, with Tom Cruise, where I'm thinking about, can we do the prediction? Is AI the magic cure or way to figure that out? I don't know, but I know a lot that people are talking about is that this event is so rare. I mean, in 1918, we had the Spanish flu. There was a flu that was probably just as contagious and probably more deadly than what we're seeing here today, and had tremendous impact on everyone in all societies. We saw people wore face masks back then. We saw that the economy, struggled around World War One, and a lot of impact was seen. But the word's been out on the street in Wall Street and with a lot of technologists. But are we experiencing a black swan? I mean, a lot of people have said this on CNBC, and I don't know. Is that what's happening?
So a black swan is a completely, unforeseen event that's got major impact in the world. To be honest, pandemics it's one of the situations to arise that's been modeled like relentlessly. It's been prepared for relentlessly. It's been forgotten by people conveniently, right? And now suddenly everyone's popping up saying this is a black swan, that's a black swan. A true black swan is like a meteor dropping on the earth and destroying New York, or suddenly Iceland being ripped apart by volcanic activity and everyone having to leave that country, or an alien invasion. I mean, these are pretty fantastical ideas, but true black swans you can't see coming. This is a black elephant. The elephant in the room and the black swan. Well, if you've got a black elephant, it's that black swan that's been in the room for over 100 years that everyone knows that there's a risk of it rearing its head and causing a huge calamity. But we've just conveniently pushed it to the side and decided that, the likelihood of that happening is a lot lower than we really want to pay attention to. So it's kind of ridiculous because we've seen SARS, we've seen MERS, we've seen Ebola. We even had Obama talking about the seriousness of pandemics like 4 or 5 years ago. We had Bill Gates talking about the seriousness. We've had countries like Singapore that are dealing with the situation today very well because they had to deal with SARS, because they kept the situations and processes and traceability and the reaction force to a pandemic in place. Because they knew that it could come back, and it could come back quite vigorously. And other places like Hong Kong and Taiwan have been able to deal with this. I mean, China really dealt with this in quite a ham-fisted way. I'm not sure whether they're being truthful about their numbers. I figure that they're not, and that's speculation, obviously. But maybe there's something there that they've just really ham-fisted. They haven't really worked out what it was, but they didn't even think it was serious, and you do have these wet markets in places like Wuhan, and people are now pointing the finger at that. It's not that. It's about the processes. It's about the government readiness, and it's about the human awareness of the situation. Absolutely no individual on the planet that was outside of government or military or doing foresight was really even thinking about this on a daily basis. So now this pops up and suddenly we're all locked away. It seems completely fantastical and science fiction in a way, but it's so real that it's coming to sort of slap us in the face every single day, right?
Although we're seeing now, 77 days after the lockdown, Wuhan is opening back up. People are, of course, still using face masks, getting the temperature checks, but we're seeing life begin to resume in the new norm in China. But I think what's so interesting is not just, how can governments be more traceable? How can they be more governing in real time? But it's thinking about these black elephants. I've never thought of it with that phrase before. But when I think of it right now, from how you so perfectly gave that definition, Nikolas, is like another black elephant could be explainable AI. We've been talking about for years that machine algorithms are going to go wrong. They're going to discriminate. They're going to do things that are not right. We even have GitHub repos out there on awful AI examples, similar to like this person does not exist and other things out there. So I could see now that I'm hearing this phrase, the black elephant, it could be many different things occurring.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd never even thought about that myself. But yeah, artificial intelligence that's misbehaving in the corner. Maybe the data sets that we've used were incorrect. I first came across AI in practical use around about 23 years ago. I went for a job interview for an unnamed company in the UK, and I was interviewing for using Lisp, which is a really old artificial intelligence language, to program Polaris missiles guidance systems. But you think about it, if you've had that level of focus and investment in artificial intelligence in weapons systems, imagine if that reality of Skynet becoming sentient becomes an actual reality, and maybe it's seeding the black elephant with some really heinous code or training that's been done by someone that's got a grudge. Those kinds of things are really interesting to think about when we're looking at foresight and scenarios.
So basically, black elephants do exist everywhere. I had this episode that's going live in a few days. I spoke recently with Lorna Davis, who's done a lot with B Corp and government activism. And we've talked about for years, will the oceans get polluted with plastics? No, it's going to happen in 100 years. Here we are in 2020. It's already happening. Big plastic farms of nets. So it's that these things can occur a lot quicker than we anticipate. And the results that we think are fantastical in our mind are actually real. They're not necessarily meteor showers or alien invasions, but they're impacting humans.
Yeah, I speak about climate change, and I've been speaking about climate change for a long time. I work with the United Nations on a program called Resilience Frontiers, which is around creating resilient solutions, because the planet is getting warmer. We're not going to be able to cool it down. It's an inevitability. So using machine learning and data and analytics to do predictions, using other practical solutions that are away from normal ideas of technology like we're talking about today. But when we start really looking at this and thinking about what truly is a black elephant, it's those things that we deny but are like stood there right in our face. And I think climate change is the best example of a black elephant in the room. And the ignorance has been fueled by lobbyists in government saying, hey, don't worry, it's fine, we'll keep burning oil, fossil fuels is the future. Unfortunately, now what we're seeing with our lockdown and the stresses in government, in the workforce, so many hourly workers, poverty rates and whatever, it's a symptom of industrialization that we've been caught in for 260 years. It's going to be very difficult to escape the gravity of that. But now maybe this new digital evolution, as I'm calling it, is going to help drag us away from this old world into a world of renewables, of artificial intelligence and biology, of being able to look at new ways of communication and new ways of electrification with super grids around the world, renewables, and then transportation as well.
And the communication, I think, all does focus on transportation, because transportation is one of the big reasons, as efficient as it is, it caused the spread of this disease or condition, COVID-19, to be that much faster because of how connected the world is. But now we're seeing, as you mentioned before, Nikolas, with Blue Dot, we're also seeing other startups out of Singapore that are working on track and trace. We actually have this app out today called Trace Together that, you know, if you're a national in Singapore, you can install it on your phone. And assuming you're someone who has received COVID-19, you go into your quarantine containment lockdown and you create a geofence border around your apartment, and the government can track you and trace you and know if you leave your apartment in 15 minutes, a government official is there to check, are you there or are you escaping?
Yeah, but the big idea behind this application, I spoke with a client at great lengths about this earlier, is the idea that everyone should install it, and everyone should turn on their Bluetooth for this application, so that they can actually trace each other and create networks out in the wild. You don't have to be infected with COVID-19. You're just out there. But if suddenly someone that you've experienced in the past couple of days and suddenly is now got COVID-19, the government can now find you, lock you down, lock the friends down that you've chatted to, and whatever. It's that ripple effect out. There's a lot of discussion here around, how much is this surveillance? How much is this utility and usefulness and protection for the individual? This is why Singapore are really good at locking this stuff down. And it's a lot easier to deploy this kind of technology in what is ultimately a police state, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think, I naturally, as someone who's in the United States, do think about data privacy, think of GDPR and CCPA. So I come from that thoughts about surveillance. But I think when you're in a society like Singapore, where there's a lot more trust in the government, a lot more unity and working together in their system, you could think, wow, I mean, we can contain things at the source and we help everyone rise above COVID-19 together.
Yeah, I guess trust is a strange word to use in somewhere like Singapore. It's an island. It's incredibly progressive. I actually really love going there. The people are awesome. The government locks it down, and it's very authoritarian in a way. It's not as authoritarian as maybe somewhere like China, but they're in charge. They lock it down. They tell you what to do, and if you break the law, you could actually spend some time behind bars, right? So I'm not sure whether it's an open, loving trust between the citizen and the government. Times like this, I think the citizens will actually follow some orders, as it were, to help lock this down, just because it means it gets them back to normal life again. I mean, I'm going to pose this question to you, David. If someone came up to you and said, in America, if you install this application and you stayed indoors for the next 4 weeks and never left, and we'll check, we could slow things down. What do you think would happen in America?
I think today in America, if that question was posed, you would have about 40 or 50 million people who would install it, and a ton of people who would not install it. And it would be on both sides of the political spectrum. I think what would help it be more effective in America is you would need to do like what Governor Cuomo is doing in New York, where he's basically starting a movement, stay at home, where Jennifer Lopez and Alex Rodriguez and all these celebrities buy into it, because America traditionally loves culture, and I think culture and the leaders that they look up to on different social platforms could help them be as effective. The reason might just be we're a different culture than in Singapore.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Absolutely. And, Peter Drucker very famously said, culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? So you can have any strategy in the world and it could be communicated. It could be very clear. The bottom line is, if your favorite musician or sportsman, sportswoman, sportsperson is starting to influence you to be safe and be at home and to give you a reason to be there, because maybe they're speaking to you on a nightly basis or whatever, in a broad sense, obviously, then maybe yes. I actually think in America, the culture is freedom. And anytime you tell me that you're taking my freedom away, I'm going to say, well, you know what, screw that. And that's the mess that America's got itself into. What was it? 300,000 people went away on spring break. And there's some there's some technologies out there that actually show you from the beach down there in Florida, and you can see the spread of where those people went to afterwards, and the networks, and through tracking smartphone technologies that people have got in their pockets, and it's incredible, right? So yeah, I mean, the thing is, Singapore's very small; it can be contained, and they've got ironclad rules around that. America's very big, and the idea of freedom isn't a bad idea, and democracy isn't a bad idea. Right now, this virus doesn't care about democracy. It doesn't care about freedom. It doesn't even care to infect humans. It just does it, and we spread it from human to human. And now we're in the situation that we're in, and we're in pretty dire straits. For a good 6 months, probably in a lockdown situation, and we're not going to get back to reality, as I was chatting to a client about earlier, for 18 to 24 months. So this is pretty significant. So I think that sometimes we have to lean into the cultural icons to make people sit up and pay attention, right?
That's right. And my call to action for the United States is, if big tech is listening to the HumAIn podcast, if you're Facebook, Google, Apple, Instagram, Snapchat, Amazon, we're giving you our data every single day for applications, for social media, and for purchases. So there must be a good way that we can just take all that data, give you the permissions. Here's my data you've been collecting for my whole life. have it now, let's start some track and trace. Because if we don't, I mean, we know that there have been predictions out there, and some of them are big predictions, but they say up to 2.5 billion people could be infected with coronavirus, COVID-19, maybe even up to 53 million people to die or succumb from the disease. But, how credible is that? Where are we going?
So 1918, 1919 Spanish flu, 50 to 100 million people dead. People were downplaying the data at that point in time. What was interesting about Spanish flu is some of the final cases they came across of a similar virus that was probably mutated from the original one back in 1918, 1919, was still popping up in 1952. So it's not that incredible to think that this is going to go far and wide. It's our response to it, right? So our ability to treat it, our ability to have healthcare that can help people that have it get over it in the more extreme cases, for us to take things seriously and to stay at home. And we're going to see cases for years for COVID-19. When vaccinations pop up, I think a lot of people are going to want to get vaccinated. There was a study that I was looking at earlier today, last year. It found that 45% of Americans, there's about 2,500 Americans were polled. 45% of them actually said that they didn't trust vaccines. Not that they wouldn't get them, it's just they don't trust them. And right now we're starting to do human trials. Probably 12 months at the earliest, we're going to have a vaccination that could work well, or we hope works well. So who's going to be first in line to get that? A lot of people are going to say no. They're going to wait to see what happens to the people that go and get it first, right?
For me, I'm a data scientist by trade, so everything is about the scientific method. You're going to create a vaccine. Perfect. Let's do a randomized controlled trial, run it on, 30 rabbits, 30 monkeys, whatever you want to. Of course, COVID-19 wouldn't make sense in that case because it only seems to be, human to human or certain animal transmission. But do a randomized control trial. Do it for 30 people. Show me the results. Boom, sign me up. I might not be number one, but I'll be number 30.
Yeah, I mean, that's not exactly how it works with vaccines. But yeah, simplistically, absolutely. They've already started human trials. And there's actually a number of stages that they go through in terms of testing that. Yes, they'll start with a smaller group of people, 20, 30 people. Then it takes 3 or 4 months to see how it fares. Does it work? Has it created some sense of antibodies within the body to create resiliency? Then take it out to a slightly further group, and suddenly you're 12 months into this study. You don't go 30. Yeah, it seems to be working. Let's release that, because we end up being in a situation where you could be affecting unborn children. You could be affecting like brain development in children as they're growing up from like 5 to 18 years old. You could be killing old people. It's not that easy, right? So I think we need to be slow and steady with the vaccination. I think we've got no choice but to be slow and steady, stay at home, because if we don't, we're just going to see hundreds of millions of people dead around the world, right?
We're talking about vaccines where some people have hesitancies to get them. But another thing that people have been not so hesitant to stop doing is shaking hands. We've heard that Dr. Fauci with the Trump administration in the U.S. said you should never shake hands again in your whole entire life. So I quote, shaking hands is not something you should do. Why have people been so easy to stop shaking hands but not necessarily get a vaccine?
Do you know what? I miss my friends. I want to hug some of my friends right now. I miss them so much. Shaking hands would be a luxury. Dr. Fauci said that because of this. It's known that once you shake someone's hand, within about 10 minutes, you actually bring your hand to your face and you smell your own fingers. It's a human biological quirk, and it comes back from the days when we were apes. We're just checking out pheromonally. Are we sort of trusted? Are we part of the same sort of tribe in a way? So that's kind of why there's this like stop shaking hands. I actually stopped shaking hands about 7 weeks ago. It was before people were shaking hands. I went to a training course for 2 days in Detroit, and people were like, oh, and I was trying to build business relationships. I was doing what I call the pandemic fist bump, right? And they see me disappear after doing a bunch of like fist bumps to go and wash my hands every time. Everyone was looking at me very strangely. But now they've sort of been emailing me back, and they're like, "Yeah, we get it. We understand why you were doing that now." So, does it change the social fabric of who we are as humans? If you don't shake hands and you stand at distance, if you're in the same room as someone or in the same open space, you've still got those mirror neurons firing. You've still got that attraction, whether they're friends or lovers or potentials in either of those cases. And that's a pretty good step towards keeping social cohesion, right?
Yes, and I wonder actually what the new norm could look like. So whether that's in 6 months or 18 or 24 months, could the new norm be that we go to in-person conferences and we actually say, "Hey, Nicholas, we're going to shake hands," and right there we take out our Purell gel, we wash our hands, we disinfect. Like, could that be the new normal? And I suspect it might be that everyone will have these devices at conferences. Infrared sensors, blue UV sensors, all these things everywhere.
Yeah, I mean that's going to be part of the new normal. I like to think of, I like to think of some science fiction and some sci-fi films that sort of make me excited to talk about this kind of crazy world. Demolition Man, right? No handshaking, hi. He didn't know how to use the 3 shells when he was going to the washroom. There's no toilet paper in the future. There's no physical sex in the future as well. Are we going to end up in that situation? I think some people would love to end up in that situation just because that's how they work in the world. I think that humans love to be around others. I think they just like the sense of human touch. And obviously, we're gonna get back to that world. I think that Dr. Fauci will be shaking hands when the vaccination has been successful. So I don't know. There's a reason again why he said that, and it's just because we're strange creatures as humans. And you know what? If I was in New York, I shook you by the hand. I'm going to be smelling my fingers in about 10 minutes.
It's just like how our beloved creatures, these dogs that we have, came from wolves. We humans, we came from a line of species that have these habits that are just so deeply ingrained. And perhaps some of that is also what you mentioned around vaccines. We know, many companies now are on this quest to find a COVID-19 vaccine. We've seen Bill Gates talk about it in his TED Talk in the last few weeks. Where do you think we are realistically on that vaccine search?
We're right at the beginning. We're 2, maybe 3 months into it. That's it. We've got another 12 months, I think, before we've got anything really hopeful to talk about. We're clamoring for hope. World leaders are clamoring for hope. They're trying to calm everyone down that there is some light at the end of the tunnel. I'm hopeful that we're going to get there. There's very, very smart people in the world working together. Artificial intelligence is sort of playing its role. Analytics is playing its role. Big data and data science is playing its role. So that's really cool. And I think that these practical uses of artificial intelligence are really why we're here and why we're talking about this in this podcast and beyond. I mean, what's really interesting is that even without that, we're not going to move as quickly as we can move today. In all reality, this is why in 1919, how did they deal with this, right? Phone calls, telegrams, and in the end, it was lock yourself up and never come out. Wear a mask if someone's sick in your home. The same thing. Have we really progressed in 100 years? It seems not. Do we have better tools to find a solution? Yes, we do. So that's the human evolutionary piece. We actually evolve pretty slowly with technology. If you think about it, we still drive internal combustion engine cars, even when we've got better solutions with electric vehicles. But when did the internal combustion engine come out? It was the Benz brothers in the late 1800s. No, how much has that truly evolved? Yes, we can go faster. Yes, we burn less fuel, but really, we're still on the starting blocks of so many parts of our lives.
And, it sounds like, as you mentioned, we're in the starting part. We've seen some work coming out from Google DeepMind with their AlphaFold. We've seen work coming out as well from different universities on protein designs, but that is just the beginning stage, right? So it could be another, 6 to 12 or 18 months till we get to good, viable vaccines, which is why there's causes where Bill Gates is saying, take the time now, commit money to coronavirus research. We've seen Jack Dorsey of Twitter just set
Yeah.
aside, millions and millions of dollars to say we need to take action now. So, I'm hopeful that the money will go into the right donor-advised funds that will help us, create solutions to come out with working vaccines.
Yeah, and we got to remember who's behind these solutions. It's humans, and even with the best machine learning and data sets, you know what? It's humans that are shaping the future, and we're going to continue to shape the future. We're not going to hand it over wholly to any model because models can't be trusted, data models, and this is kind of the dilemma. We want the future. We want it so bad right now. We want to imagine, liberation from this industrialized world. And you know what? It's not going to be in our generation, and it's not going to be in our lifetime. You know what? In maybe 100 years' time, it's going to be a really interesting time to be alive because the world is suddenly going to be on the right track with digital evolution. And you know what? I think a lot of the old male white world leaders, or the old male world leaders, I should say, that are getting in the way of good policy decisions are going to make way for younger female leadership that's going to make the right decisions about, thrusting humanity forward than we have done so far.
So thrusting humanity forward, that leads us to futurism. That leads us to the future of work. And typically we say the future of work enabled by AI, but I even want to go so far to say the future of work is being enabled by COVID-19. I mean, think about the acceleration. I know it's not a great thought, but there is a positive side that technology initiatives that companies were hesitant to do on digital transformation, we're now seeing a lot of progression there, whether it's, remote learning with Zoom and Microsoft Team meetings, or then even offering opportunities for different employees to see how you could do workflows with tools that used to have to be in person. So I'm not fully sold yet on whether, the world is going to be all digital or go back to all in person or some hybrid. But what are you seeing for the future of work, both enabled by AI and COVID?
It's really interesting. We say that we've been thrust into the digital future, and it's like, well, no, we've been thrust into sitting in front of computers on screens like we're talking on, having meetings that are maybe just as productive as we would have, on conference calls or in person in the office. Big deal. That's what I say to that. Yes, kids are at home; they're not in school. They are being taught, virtually by teachers. Big deal. I mean, this is not the absolute future of work. The absolute future of work is a fundamental reprogramming of how the industrial world works, and gets out of the way for a true digital evolution of, biology, communications, transportation, and energy. And once we actually get to those foundational levels that are governmental support and international investment level, we can start transforming the world entirely from the foundation. And the future of work is that foundational evolution more than it is using the gadgetry and software that we speculate might be the future of work, right? The reason I'm very skeptical about saying, an app or a piece of software is suddenly going to thrust us into the new world is that it's just a moment in time, right? I mean, do you remember Windows 95?
I remember DOS, right?
Yeah, but do you pine over it? Do you sit there at your computer that you sat at now thinking, you know what? I just want to play around with DOS for a couple of hours. No, everything is temporary with software. When you look at true foundational change in the world, what I'm calling the digital evolution, renewable energy, digital supergrids, a real-time transfer of cheap, almost free energy around the world, mass electrification of transportation, completely new ways of communication using everything from artificially intelligent systems through to quantum computing, and civilizations being established on the moon or even beyond. That's when I'm talking about a true future of work. It's a complete change in the foundations. So will things change? There's going to be some people saying, you know what, I do want to live on the road. I want to be a nomadic traveler and I want to work. And companies are going to be going, yeah, we trust you because you know what? We've seen that you've been able to do that during the COVID-19 situation. And that comes back to really, the problem in progress towards a new future is that the companies that are heavily invested in the old world won't trust any new thinkers and heavily invest in them to truly transform how the world will be. Now, this gets really interesting. Countries like China, countries like India are going to be the countries that drag us into this new world faster than countries like Canada or the UK or the USA.
And, thinking about this future of work, as fantastical or near to the future as it may seem, there's a lot of technology that can enable that. Some of that is different AI devices using NLP and computer vision. But another part that we don't give a lot of thought about as society is robots. And they've been around here for many, many years, but now they're coming of age, if you will.
Yeah.
We're seeing robots in hospitals giving people diagnoses. We're seeing robots as dogs for those who want to have companionship in their aging years. I think robots could be an interesting opportunity because robots can't get COVID.
It's true, but like if someone with COVID-19 was to handle a robot and then pass it to you, it's certainly a transmission device. So yeah, discuss the philosophical ramifications of that, right? In a society, in a community where robots are, shared maybe. So no, yes, robots can sort of be independent. I was reading a Wired article, and there's robotics that's helping, nurses at the front line check on patients or whatever. That's really cool. I don't mind the idea of robots. What I don't really like about the idea of robotics is that we're trying to get them to do things that are so human that it is driving us backwards in terms of progress. If we think about artificial intelligence and robotics taking a completely new track on how things should work, I think that we're going to make bigger leaps ahead. Why do robots have to look like a human? Right? I mean, the word robot comes from Czechoslovakian and it's the word for slave. Why have we created so many humans that are basically robots in their jobs today? Now, for example, call center operators. You train them, you give them a script, they stay to the script, and then they leave. It's a perfect use case for an artificially intelligent bot to be able to do exactly the same job because they're exactly the same mechanism, right? When you're actually got robotics, you need to trust what that looks like. We've seen like Boston Dynamics Atlas robot. People are terrified by this, right? We don't have Michael from what's was it Alien Covenant and some of those films. Michael Fassbender plays that robot. The uncanny valley, you don't quite trust him because he looks a little bit too human. So we're going to have these strange, Robbie the Robot kind of characters taking us forward. But really, is the robotics that don't look like humans, that do something very specific, soft robotics that are coming out of MIT Media Lab, and underwater robotics that just don't look like anything that really existed before. They're really interesting to me. I think robotics have got a huge role to play in the world. I think that we need to stop chasing, human style robotics that are suddenly gonna walk like us and talk like us, and just get back to basics on robotics that just do the one or two things really, really well and without our intervention.
I think that couldn't be better said. It's, why do we have to make things that look like us, sound like us, and act like us? Because that's relatable for humans, when instead a robot could be any device with a circuit chip, with programming in any sort of form. I mean, I've seen that there's now like Stingray robotics that are going down in the ocean to measure pollution levels. I mean, there's so much out there that's possible. And I'm excited for what that future looks like. I think it is one of humans and machines together. And I know right now we are in unprecedented times with the pandemic. But Nikolas, if we're thinking about a call to action for our listeners, what would you share today about your hopes for the future?
My hopes for the future is this, that we come back to humanity and what it means to be alive, to be sentient, to be conscious, to create community, and to understand exactly where we're going together on this journey that is the human race. If we do that, and we spend just as much time understanding that as we do working in new fields like artificial intelligence, machine learning, data science, then we're going to have a balance that creates a future with solutions that are truly going to change the world.
Nikolas Badminton, futurist, thank you so much for being with us on the HumAIn podcast.
Thanks. It's been a blast. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And for everyone who's with us live, if you have any questions, feel free to share them on our live channels from Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, or Twitch. We'll be taking questions for the next couple of minutes. And while we wait to see which questions we have coming in, I'm thinking more day in, day out. I mean, the future could be, as you're sharing, Nikolas, we could have robots, and the robots are taking our temperatures at the airports. At restaurants, every restaurant could have a robot. But does the robot have to be that physical robot, or could it be these cameras in the ceilings? Could they be smart devices enabled in our wrists and our eyes? We can maybe even have contact lenses that are these robots of the future. Yeah,
and we're already getting there. There's some. There's one company who's at CES called Mojo Vision. I spoke to a conference of doctors of optometry about 8 weeks ago, and it was really interesting. Looking at biohacking and looking at wearables, looking at artificial intelligence and the role that they play in vision. And yeah, absolutely, we're going to be sort of stepping into this new transhumanist world. We probably need to have another podcast to really get into the work and the thinking that I do around transhumanism, because you know what. We are born as human 1.0. We're the foundational platform. We can upgrade ourselves. I mean, a few years ago at a conference, I had a microchip put in my left hand, and it's passive. It's an NFC-enabled device. I can open the front door of my garage using it because it's got an NFC RFID-enabled lock on that. But this is the future that we're headed towards. Human and the machine, and some of us want to take it a step further and really truly upgrade who we are.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to the future. I'm looking forward to also having one of those chips in my arm. So definitely send me the link. I will be the next person to sign up. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks very much. I can arrange that as well. I'll put you in touch with my friend Emil Grafstra.
Perfect. Well, thank you again. And everyone, thank you for joining us. We'll be having the podcast episode available on all major podcast platforms. Please be safe and stay healthy wherever you are.
Thanks very much.